In the early morning of April 29th, 110 million tons of limestone rock slid down the east face of Turtle Mountain, burying the eastern section of Frank, Alberta. The slab of rock that fell was approximately 150 meters deep, 425 meters wide, and 1 kilometer high. This was and still is the deadliest landslide in Canadian history. Frank is an old mining town located in the Rocky Mountains of Alberta, Canada. It was founded in 1901 after two American entrepreneurs, Sam Gebo and Henry Frank, who developed the first coal mines in the Crow's Nest Pass area. The town was erected between the Canadian Pacific Railway tracks and the newly built mine. By fall of that same year, the town was officially opened. On September 10, 1901, the town held a grand opening. The CPR brought in guests to attend the opening, as Frank was the first incorporated village in the Crow's Nest Pass. Noteworthy guests included the Albertan Premier at the time and the Federal Minister of the Interior, Clifford Sifton. By 1903, 1,000 people inhabited Frank. There were about 24 businesses, a school, and a regional post office. Turtle Mountain itself stands 2,000 meters above sea level. It contains deposits of limestone and coal, of which make up the mountain's base. This base, made up of Mesozoic clastics and coals, made the mountain structurally weak and often allowed for additional movement. This movement allowed for new cracks to form at the peak. Snow from the frozen winter months settled at the peak and melted in the spring. The water could gather and settle in these newly formed cracks and the fissures as it moved down the peak. As the water froze again, this created internal pressure in those gaps. The erosion of shale and limestone eventually created an overhang to form on the upper half of the mountain. It is interesting to note that the native peoples in that area called Turtle Mountain the mountain that moves, and refused to camp near it. Before the disaster, miners noted that they could feel the mountain rumbling occasionally. This sometimes caused support structures made of timber to split and crack. The mine superintendent also reported a general squeeze at depths between 1,100 meters and 1,500 meters. Although the mine's owners claimed that its activities did not contribute to the slide, later studies determined that the mountain was so close to a breaking point that any small deformation to the mountain could have triggered the event. In the winter of 1902 to 1903, there was an unusual amount of snowfall recorded. Early April was unusually warm, causing the spring water runoff to be of a higher volume than usual. However, on April 28th, the temperature once again plummeted into the evening, down to negative 18 degrees Celsius, causing the water to freeze. With this final provocation, the massive wedge of limestone broke free from the upper half of the mountain, shattered, and tumbled down to the town below at speeds up to 120 kilometers per hour. During that time, a freight train pulled out of the town's mine. The train's crew reported that they could hear a deafening rumble behind them. The conductor immediately sped the train up to full speed and safely crossed the bridge over the Crow's Nest River. In fact, the sound of the rockslide was so loud that the residents of Cochrane, nearly 200 kilometers away, heard the noise. Witnesses who were lucky enough to be outside the path of the rockslide reported that the sound lasted approximately 100 seconds. The sound could only be described as steam escaping under high pressure or an explosion. As the sound subsided, the rocks finally came to a halt after sliding 4 kilometers across the valley and rising up until about 152 meters above the valley floor opposite to Turtle Mountain. The valley bottom was covered by 3 square kilometers of limestone and buried up to a depth of 14 meters. In its wake, the slide killed at least 70 people and destroyed a portion of the town. Only 12 bodies could be pulled from the rubble due to the depth and the sheer size of the boulders, some of which were the size of a family home. In some places, the rocks reached a depth of 45 meters, making it impossible and dangerous to excavate. The town that was swallowed up by the rocks included 7 miners' cottages, all surface buildings belonging to the Canadian-American Coal and Coke Company, the McVie and Porpore construction camp, a dairy farm, 2 ranches, a shoe store, a livery, Frank Cemetery, 2 kilometers of cart track, 2 kilometers of the Canadian Pacific Railway line, and 1.5 kilometers of the just completed Frank and Grassy Mountain Railway line. Lillian Clark, an employee at the hotel in Frank, narrowly escaped the disaster. She had worked late the night before, and her employer offered her a room to stay overnight. Some of her family wasn't as fortunate. Her mother, Amelia Clark, and her 6 siblings had died. Her father, Alfred Clark, who had been working in the mine with another miner, had taken his lunch break around 4 a.m. Unlike the rest of the crew that were trapped underground, Alfred was struck and killed by the falling boulders. 17 miners were underground when the slide occurred. At the time, news reports incorrectly stated that there were between 50 and 60 men trapped. The men found the entrance of the mine shaft blocked by the rubble and could not successfully dig their way through. On top of being trapped, water from the nearby river was coming through a second tunnel as it had been dammed by the slide. One of the miners suggested that they dig through a seam of coal that could reach the surface. The miners dug for a total of 13 hours and they were able to reach the surface. The air was so toxic due to the coal and lack of oxygen that only 3 men had the energy to dig through the final layers of coal to the surface. Other survivors included 3-year-old Fernie Watkins, who was found in the debris outside her family's home, 27-month-old Marion Leitch, who was thrown from her house when the rock slide hit and was found on top of a pile of hay, and 15-month-old Gladys Ennis, who was also thrown from her home but rescued by her parents, Lucy and Sam Ennis. She was also the last survivor of the slide and died in 1993, aged 91. It should also be recognized that a CPR brakeman named Sid Choquette alerted an oncoming passenger train of the buried train tracks. Choquette ran 2 kilometers through a dusty, treacherous, rock-filled landscape and prevented the impending disaster. At any time, he could have been killed by falling rocks. He was given a letter of commendation and a $25 check by the CPR to recognize his heroism. This is now $750 in today's dollars. Help did not arrive until April 30th. The train carried police and doctors from Fort Macleod. Premier Frederick Haltane arrived with engineers on May 1st to investigate the cause of Turtle Mountain's rockslide. At the time, there were no new fissures that had formed at the peak of the mountain. Uncertain that there wouldn't be another slide, the town was evacuated. The Geological Survey of Canada sent 2 geologists to investigate further. Due to the amount of limestone that fell from the mountain, 2 new peaks formed. The geologists indicated that the north peak that overlooked the town was not in imminent danger of collapsing. On May 10th, the town citizens returned, and over the next 20 days, the CPR rail line was cleared. During that time, coal miner workers reopened passageways into the mine. Although this disaster deeply impacted the town of Frank, it did not stop it from growing. In 1905, a new residential subdivision was developed north of the tracks to aid with the mining productions. A zinc smelter and a 3-story hotel named Rocky Mountain Sanatorium were constructed close to the cold sulfur spring. However, due to markets at the time, the zinc smelter never operated. The fear of another landslide led to the government-ordered closure of the South Town site in 1911. Several buildings in that area were torn down over the next few years. The residential subdivision built in 1905 remained. The Rocky Mountain Sanatorium had been converted into a military hospital in 1917, but was torn down in 1928 after it had been abandoned for a number of years. The original mine was closed in 1917 after it became unprofitable. Today the town has a population over almost 1,200. In 1977, the Frank Slide was designated a provincial historical resource, and in 1985, an interpretive center was opened that explained both the rock slide and the coal mining history of that area. It is a popular tourist destination where visitors can walk among the large boulders and see firsthand the destruction caused by the rock slide. To this day, the slide area is a restricted development zone, preventing construction and alteration of the site, with the exception of Highway 3. Although the town has remained safe over the last century, geologists have speculated that another slide is inevitable. Between the 2 peaks, the south peak is most likely to fall. When it does, the slide is estimated to produce 1/6 of the debris of the 1903 slide. The mountain is continuously being monitored for any signs of instability. In the event that the mountain is likely to collapse, the citizens will be issued an early warning, giving time to evacuate.